Seeing that it's now October, we have officially entered into soup season. This cheeseburger chowder is one of my favorites to make. It's a hearty, filling soup made up of potatoes, ground beef, carrots, celery, and cheese. Here's how you make it. To start off, wash and prepare all of your vegetables to be chopped. We're going to be using carrots, celery, curly parsley, a sweet onion, and potatoes. Cut about 3 medium carrots or 200 grams worth into a large dice. I think the easiest way to cut carrots for applications like this, where the size doesn't really matter, is just to cut lengthwise down the center of the carrot, lay it flat on the cutting board, and create half moons throughout the entire length of the carrot. Next, you'll do the same with about 5 to 6 stalks of celery, or roughly 200 grams. Make one cut down the valley of that celery, turn it sideways, and chop down the length of it to create a dice. Shoot for pieces that are roughly the same size as the carrots you just cut. Next, you're going to chop your medium sweet onion, or about 200 grams worth, into a small dice. Now, if you've never been taught how to cut an onion, the easiest way to do it is to cut it in half and leave the root end attached. Then you can run your knife through the length from root to shoot, but not cutting all the way through, and then turn it sideways and create a dice, allowing the layers to do most of the work for you. The parsley in this dish is optional, so if you want to use it, it's one bunch of curly parsley, or about 30 grams, roughly chopped into small pieces. I add parsley to the soup purely for aesthetic purposes. You're not going to get much flavor out of this. I just like having some green at the end and as a garnish for each bowl. For your potatoes, you're going to cut them into a large dice, and you'll need about 550 grams worth. Now, depending on the size of the potato you use, that can be about 3 medium potatoes or 5 small ones. I prefer to use russet potatoes for this soup because they're a bit starchier. A waxy potato would still work fine, but I think the extra starch from these russets helps to thicken up the soup a little bit and make it more chowder-like. To start the cooking process, heat some oil in a large stock pot over medium-high heat, and then add in your vegetables, the celery, carrots, and onions, and allow those to brown and develop some color. Lightly season them with salt when you add them to the pot, and then after they've had the time to cook for a bit, make some room in the center of that pot and add your ground beef. I have the recipe written to use 93.7 ground beef, but any kind of ground meat will work. A fattier grind of beef will certainly make it taste better. Just be aware of how that affects the nutritional and calorie information if that's something that matters to you. Now, I know that super lean ground beef isn't always the cheapest, so if you want something that's a little bit less expensive, ground turkey is an easy substitute to make. After the beef is brown, add in your potatoes to the pot and then pour in 32 ounces or 946 grams of chicken stock or bone broth. In addition, you're going to add just enough water to cover all those ingredients to make sure they're completely submerged. I added about 2 cups or 480 grams of water. You might need more or less depending on the size of your pot. Cover and boil that for 10 to 15 minutes to allow the potatoes to soften. While the soup is boiling, you can begin to make your bechamel sauce. In a separate pan over medium-low heat, add 1.5 tablespoons or 21 grams of butter and allow it to melt. Make sure you keep this moving around as we don't want the butter to burn. My pan was a little hot here, but we still made it work. Then add in 2.5 tablespoons or 21 grams of flour. If you need gluten-free, you can use oat flour. That's what I'm using here, and it turns out just fine. Keep stirring your flour and butter mixture constantly to develop your roux. Then once it comes together, you can add 1.5 cups or 360 grams of milk, slowly adding it into the pan and stirring constantly to incorporate. Now, you might find if you use oat flour, when you add the milk, it will begin to clump up. Keep stirring it constantly, allow it to come up to temperature, and eventually it will smooth out. In my experience, wheat flour incorporates a bit easier into the sauce than oat flour does. Gordon Ramsay says to use cold milk and that will prevent any clumping. Even when I've used cold milk in the past, the oat flour still clumps up. You just have to be patient with it. Enough time, temperature, and stirring, and it will smooth out. So, once you do get your sauce smooth, you can add your cheddar cheese. Add 1 cup or 112 grams of cheddar cheese. Freshly grated is best. Pre-shredded from the package works too though. If you want this soup to be outstanding and extra cheesy, you're going to want to add more cheese. To keep it at least somewhat macro-friendly, we have to pull back the reins somewhere, so I cut it at a cup of cheese. Stir in that cheese until it's all melted, and then you can pour the bechamel sauce into the soup. Give everything a good strong mix to make sure it's all incorporated evenly, and you might find at this step that you have a good creamy soup depending on how much water you had to add earlier. If it's still a bit thin and watery like mine is here, you're going to want to add a cornstarch slurry to help thicken it up. Mix together 2 tablespoons or 15 grams of cornstarch and 2 tablespoons or 30 grams of cold water into a slurry and slowly add that into your soup. Make sure you stir constantly as you add this and you will begin to see the soup thicken up. Next, add 1 tablespoon or 12 grams of granulated chicken bouillon. This is an ingredient that you don't necessarily have to include. You can get by with just using salt, but it does give the soup a bit more power. Stir that all together and then add in 1/4 cup or about 20 grams of chopped parsley. As I mentioned earlier, the parsley is really just for aesthetic purposes, to have some color contrast against the yellows, oranges, and browns that are already in the soup. Give the soup a test and you can adjust any seasonings with salt and pepper to taste. After you've got it in a place you like, it's all done, it's ready to eat. When I developed this recipe, I didn't intend for it to be a meal prep recipe, but soups actually work extremely well in the fridge. Because of their high water content, they reheat more evenly in the microwave and even make a good candidate for a freezer meal. The recipe we used in this video will make 6 large, meal-sized bowls of soup. Usually when I eat soup, I need something else to accompany it in order to keep me full, but a large bowl of this, because it's so hearty, keeps me full for hours. For storage purposes, you can divide it into individual portions, but I just keep the entire pot in the fridge and then pull out what I need anytime I want to reheat it for a meal. It's got about 568 calories and 47 grams of protein for each large bowl and makes about 6 servings. I've included the full written recipe for this cheeseburger chowder in the description of the video below, or you can head on over to mealprepmanual.com and find a fully adjustable version in case you want to make a smaller or larger amount.